Hello guys, welcome to Dharma Geosphere. Today I'll be interacting with you on the questions that have come up in the geography section of GS1 paper today. I'm glad many of you have done the geography questions very well. I'll just discuss the questions one by one and see what are the core points that were required to have been given each of the questions. The overall the questions were moderately easy, and I'm sure you all would have done very well and you will be scoring very high. So for the first question was discuss the geophysical characteristics of circum-Pacific zone. So the circum-Pacific zone, you all know, is just a horseshoe shaped area in the Pacific Ocean which extends from North and South America to the Eastern Asia, Australia and New Zealand. So now coming to characteristics. Characteristics is different from phenomena like earthquakes or volcanoes and all that. Though the Ring of Fire does have a lot of earthquakes and volcanoes. So the Ring of Fire features could be the following: seismicity, volcanicity, or you could say seismic zones, oceanic trenches, volcanic arcs and volcanic belts and plate movements. More importantly, the subduction zone and the Benioff zone. You also have mountain trenches, you have hydrothermal vents. So it is also the whole region is a site of the earthquake activity. Of course, you can either say earthquake activity. More precisely, if it is geophysical, the word seismic zone is more appropriate. So then, once you have mentioned the characteristics, you can just elaborate that there have been around 452 volcanoes, both active, dormant, and then 80% of the world's largest earthquakes occur here, and then it's mostly seismically active region, followed by the Alpide belt that extend from Java to the North Atlantic Ocean via the Himalayas and the southern Europe. So the other features, you must draw the world map and the circum-Pacific belt clearly, as I've shown here. You can see the entire circum-Pacific belt. Here, apart from what I've already said, you also have very active San Andreas fault in California, and also the active Keene Charlotte fault in the somewhere in Canada. So then you have, of course, island arcs, you have smaller plates, larger plates, subduction zones, and of course you have tsunami zones occurring here, and of course the huge Champagne vent in the Mariana Trench. So broadly, these are the various characteristics of the circum-Pacific belt. If you have drawn a map and have explained what exactly it is, and you talk about the tectonic boundaries causing the subduction zone, I think that should be it. Of course, you can also mention why it is called Ring of Fire and why it triggers earthquakes, etc. But that's not important because it's just a 10 marks question. So I'm sure you would have covered all those characteristics of the circum-Pacific Ring of Fire, and then we will move on to the second question. This question was straight out of what you would have read from the special report of the IPCC, that is, the process of desertification does not have climate boundaries. Justify with example. Basically, the question is saying that it is just not the deserts where desertification occurs, but it occurs much beyond that due to various reasons. And all these have been given very clearly and concisely in the IPCC special report on climate change, which was released during the last year and there was a separate chapter on desertification. So I'm sure you would have gone through this report and also answered it well. Basically, the desertification meaning is a literal expansion of deserts, but it's a catch-all term for, basically it means land degradation in water-scarce parts of the world. This degradation includes temporary or permanent decline in quality of soil, vegetation, water resources or wildlife say for example. So basically all these areas are come under desertification. So these areas are not restricted to any particular climate boundary, but they occur in many parts. So causes of desertification are broadly divided between those relating to how land is or it is not managed, and those relating to climate. More importantly, the causes of climate include the natural fluctuations in climate and global warming as a result of human caused greenhouse gases. So the role of climate is important in the desertification. It's a significant factor that the land surface is warming more quickly than the earth's surface as a whole. And recent studies which have been shown in the report that it is because of the lapse rate, that is the rate the air temperature decreases with height through the atmosphere, but it is experiencing larger decreases over the ocean than in the land. So this results in smaller increase in surface ocean temperatures compared to the land surface's global temperature. So that is how you should be able to differentiate the desertification and how the climate change are occurring and how they are so different, and it is just not in deserts but in other areas as well. So both natural variability in climate and global warming can also affect rainfall patterns, so which can contribute to desertification. So once the rainfall patterns are changed, desertification can also occur there. So again, that is not related to the climate. So then rainfall has a cooling effect on the land surface, so a decline in rainfall can allow soils to dry out in the heat and become more prone to erosion. And while on the other hand, heavy rainfall can erode soil itself and cause waterlogging and subsidence. So for example, you should, I'm sure you would have given the example, you should give the example of the desertification that occurred in Sahel region of Africa, and which has been linked to the natural fluctuations in Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans rather than just being dry desert. So, and the research also suggests that partial recovery of rains was driven by warming sea surface temperatures in Mediterranean. Again, you can take the example of Cholistan desert of Pakistan, wherein you find the flora and fauna have been thinning out gradually with the increasing severity of desertization. This again is not related to the climate boundary. And again, a study of Mongolia found that all species richness and diversity indicators declined significantly because of grazing and due to the increasing temperatures over the last decade. So a couple of examples, and if you have understood that desertification is just not deserts but land degradation, then I'm sure the examiner will understand that you have gone through that report, you know what desertification is, and with these examples I'm sure you will get very good marks. This is again a repeat question, straightforward question. Account for the present location of iron and steel industry away from the source of raw material by giving examples. So by common sense, raw materials like coal, etc. are exhaustible resources. You can't always have coal because it is an exhaustible material. So obviously once the raw material exhausts, there are strategic reasons to move away the iron and steel industries. But apart from this, there are more strategic reasons. Say for example, in USA and USSR, they adopted a policy not to follow the concentration of industry in one region. Thus, in USA, some plants were set up in the western region, such as say in California, and the USSR. But more importantly, you should give the example of India, where the iron and steel plant has been shifted to the coastal region for a variety of reasons. It could be because of depleting coal resources in the mainland, which could change the economics of cost of transportation of raw material versus that of the finished products. And more importantly, near the port, steel can be exported and raw material can be imported with ease. And then also because of modern technologies such as electric smelters, open hearth, etc. help in shifting the iron and steel industries away from coal and iron ore reserves by making efficient use of scrap metal and also reducing energy requirement. Say for example, Bustan Steel plant in Ghaziabad. This is just next door to Delhi. This is a very good example of how modern technology has made to move away with the iron and steel industry from the raw material to the place of where the modern technology is happening. So this is a good example of Bhushan Steel Plant in Ghaziabad, and then you could have given the shift off for the iron and steel plants towards the coastal areas like in Visakhapatnam and Ratnagiri. Could have also given coastal cities USA such as Cleveland, Detroit and Chicago. So these are obvious reasons why the iron and steel industries are moving away from the source regions. So one is strategic reason, the other is the moving towards the coastal regions, the other is the modern technology. Then of course you should draw flow charts and explain the major location factors, traditional location factors, and then move on to say that because of these three reasons they have moved it. I'm sure you have all done. Then this is another way important, but 250 words. The interlinking of rivers can provide viable solutions to the multidimensional interrelated problems of droughts, floods and interrupted vegetation. So you have to divide this question into three parts: how interlinking of rivers is reducing drought, how it is reducing floods, and how it is reducing vegetation. Critically examine whether it is actually happening or not. So you should write both the pros and cons of this interlinking of rivers. So the ILR program in India is a very ambitious project. We should start off with that. It attempts to link 37 rivers to 30 links, covering a distance of 15,000 kilometers that will transfer about 174 trillion liters of water a year. So the interlinking of rivers has two components: the Himalayan and the Peninsula. All interlinking schemes are aimed at transferring of water from one river system to another, or by lifting across the natural basins. So large variation in rainfall and subsequent availability of water resources in space and time. Because of this high variability, floods and drought coexist in our country. So one way of reducing this drought and floods is through the interlinking of rivers, because mostly the project claims to provide additional irrigation to 35 million hectares in the water-scarce western and peninsular regions, that thereby attending to the problem of drought. The interlinking project also claims to generate total power of about 34,000. So this is in addition to the addressing the issue of drought. And then there is a lot of which will further also lead to groundwater recharging, which will again address the issue of water scarcity. And then the interlinking would create a path for aquatic ecosystems. They can migrate from one river to another, which in turn may support the livelihoods of people, and then the fishery also may include. And more importantly, it will contribute to flood hazard mitigation for India. So, because by creating multi-purpose storage reservoirs in upstream countries such as Nepal and Bhutan, this will facilitate energy generation and other benefits, and not allow the water to come towards India, which is the main reason for causing of floods in Bihar, etc. It also promotes national integration. Of course, that is there, and then it will unify the country through the panchayats. And when coming to navigation, so this is how you have addressed by stopping the reservoirs flow during the rainfall from the upstream areas. You are stopping the floods, and you are also improving the irrigation, etc., and enabling to attend to the issue of drought. Third point is about navigation. So during this interlocking of rivers, large canals are being set up which link the rivers. This is expected to facilitate not only inland navigation, but it may also provide enhancing the security of the country by an additional water line of defense. You see, this is how not only a water line of defense, but this is also useful for navigation, because the army troops and all can move through these channels. Say for example, Ganga and Brahmaputra region can get rid of floods that come every year with the help of this project. Straight away you can quote this example. The irrigation land will also increase about 15%, because 15,000 kilometers of river and 10,000 kilometers of navigation will be developed along this Ganga-Brahmaputra link. So it will also reduce the transportation cost because of the easy navigability. So this is the next question. on urban flooding. We have done this question in our practice answers quite a number of times about urban flooding and flooding. Specifically, this is related to the smart cities, how the floods have outsmarted the smart cities when they occurred in Hyderabad and Pune within a short duration of time. There were a lot of articles on this. So the question is, account for the huge flooding of millions cities in India, including the smart ones like Hyderabad and Pune, suggest lasting remedial measures. So the core point here is lasting remedial measures. So I'll discuss that. So these are the causes of urban floods. These are routine, I'm sure you all know. Basically the causes are divided into natural and anthropogenic, and various causes of anthropogenic are unplanned urbanization, destruction of lakes, unauthorized colonies, poor solid waste management, drainage system, and irresponsible steps taken by the policy makers regarding the hydrological system and lack of flood control. So two very important long-lasting measures to prevent urban flooding are, one is the sponge cities instead of the smart cities, and the other is management of wetlands. First is the idea of sponge city, which makes cities more permeable so as to hold and use the water which falls upon it. So sponge cities can absorb the rainwater, which is then naturally filtered by the soil and allowed to reach urban aquifers. This allows for the extraction of water from the ground to the urban or peri-urban wells. Is one of the most important sustainable remedial measure, particularly for the inland states. Coming to the coastal states, a very important sustainable remedial measure for preventing floods is the wetland management. So we often neglect these issues of incremental land use change, particularly of those commons which provide us with the necessary ecological support, and that is wetlands. So we need to start paying attention to the management of our wetlands by involving local communities through various public-private partnerships, so that this becomes a sustainable measure in ensuring flood management. So another question is, India has immense potential of solar energy, though there are regional variations in its development. So here you should first attempt what is the solar potential, the immense potential. That is, we have 300 clear sunny days, we have over a dozen perennial rivers, and a coastline of more than 7,500 kilometers, and how solar photovoltaic cells are very economically important electrical source. And the batteries satisfy the requirement of electricity during the night, and this could not only just electrify the inland, but it also help in managing the seawater desalination, and can also help in giving electricity to synthetic natural gas beyond other measures, as we all know. So India has a very vast potential. Nearly 60% of the total land is covered by the sun's rays, which receives more than an annual average global insolation above 5 kilowatt per meter square per day. So that is quite high. But only issues, there is a 40% which does not receive this kind of an average, it is much below the average. So those are the places, which shows these regional variations. Apart from this, it is also very important to understand that for setting up of the solar energy plants, you need kind of a particular type of a land which is not available in all the states. So recently there was an article covered by the Down to Earth wherein it had showed the solar hotspots, which shows, but there are also some very important states where the availability of barren or unculturable land in many states is not available. Those states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh and Bihar do have those lands, and The solar power plants have been set up here. There are some of the other regions which have not been set up, so you should understand which are these regions where there is an availability of barren on uncultivable land for setting up the solar power plants and where it is not. So there is again a regional variation with reference to this. So the 2 points you should highlight: one is the regional variation as far as the incoming solar radiation or insolation is concerned. The other is the availability of the barren or barren land. So the maximum global horizontal irradiance is in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Whereas there are also regional variations with respect to the implementation of the national solar mission. Say for example, Dharni has become the first village to achieve 100% installed solar capacity with 100 kilowatt lighting, around 450 in homes. And the R&D has been initiated in empowering the domestic manufacturing sector and creating intra-state transmission lines in states like Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Maharashtra, whereas in some of the states this could not pick up so far. So these are all the regional variations which we should mention as far as the solar energy program implementation is concerned. The next question is another very interesting question. Examine the status of forest resources of India and its resultant impact on climate change. So there has been the forest report. I'm sure you would all read that in the prelims itself. So what here you should do, because instead of just simply writing it very mechanically, you try to give a flow chart and a diagram like this, which shows that the forests are able to create their own carbon cycle. And forests are very important to control the carbon emissions because they control their own carbon cycle. So this way it will enrich the answer. So once you have done this, you can show how forests present themselves as a potential solution to global warming, and they can effectively contribute to CO2 capture and sequestration over different time periods. So these periods are greater the longer the longevity of the forest species, and it also depends on the type of forestation, afforestation measures, crop rotation, etc. that have been carried out in various parts of the forest land. So most importantly, you should highlight on India's afforestation and forest cover and reforestation program, because these have shown some amount of success. So you can just show some graph. One graph you can show India's increasing in tree plantation and forest cover compared to the other countries. It's among the top 5, and then you can show the reforestation mega projects which India has taken up. It has basically 3 major schemes: the National Afforestation Program, the National Mission for Green India, and the Forest Fire Program. So you can see the light blue bars relate to the rate of afforestation versus reforestation. So afforestation has been on the increase. So we have been addressing the issue of global warming and thereby the climate change. So that is how we should be able to relate. But here what is more important is those 2 graphs and this diagrammatic representation of how forests help in retaining the carbon cycle and thereby impacting the global warming and climate change. So that is all, guys. I am sure you all would have done well. This is just a first cut and a very quick look at the questions and the possible essence or core points that were required to have been given in these questions as answers. So I'm sure you would have included all those points which I have covered. I just got the paper in the afternoon and I just made an immediate attempt to address these questions. I'm sure you all have done well. We'll catch up soon and I will interact with you on the geography optional paper. All the best and bye.